Ever get that feeling? You know when you meet someone new and their personality just clicks with yours? Makes you think about what made them that way, what made you you. That's what this deep dive is all about, the science of personality. And we're going way deeper than that nature versus nurture thing. We've got some research papers, opinions from experts. Oh, and get this. There's even this quote from a psychologist who thought he could turn any kid into anything. A doctor, a lawyer, I don't know, let's just say not so savory profession.
It's a question that has fascinated people for, well, forever, really.
Hmm.
What is it that makes us who we are? And you're about to find out that the answer is way more complicated than you might expect.
Right. It's like we hear stuff like, oh, they were just born that way.
Yeah.
But then there's also this whole idea that people can totally transform. And this is what I found so interesting about that Unit 12 document you sent over. It lays out both sides of the whole nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah, and it's tempting to just pick a side, isn't it? Like, are we destined by our genes, or is it all about how we were raised? But it's so much more complicated than that. It's not as simple as saying one side wins. It's more like, imagine a dance, this intricate kind of dance between what we're born with and the world around us.
Okay, so how about we break down this dance step by step? The nature argument, the document says, always seems to bring up twins, right?
Yeah.
Especially twins separated at birth.
Exactly. It's like nature's doing this experiment for us. You have these twins raised in totally different environments, but they still end up with these crazy similarities. It makes you wonder just how much is hardwired in us from the very beginning. Like take babies, for example. Some are just naturally easygoing, while others, well, they're a little more, let's say, high-spirited.
In this temperament you're talking about, this like inherent way of being, that's kind of like the base of our personality, right?
Exactly. Think of it like clay. You can mold clay into different shapes and stuff, but it still has its own properties, right? The texture, how flexible it is, those things stay the same. Our temperament, it kind of sets us up for certain traits, like whether we're introverted or extroverted, whether we like to play it safe or take risks, but how those things actually play out in our lives, how we learn to deal with other people, control our emotions, go after our goals, that's where nurture comes in.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this straight. Our genes give us the clay, and then our environment, like the sculptor, shaping and refining that clay.
Precisely. And this is where that whole emphasis on the formative years in Unit 12 comes into play, those early years. Think about your own childhood for a second. All those experiences, your family dynamics, what your caregivers and other kids told you, the cultural norms you picked up, it all comes together to shape how you see yourself and the world around you.
So it's like our upbringing is the blueprint for our personality.
Yeah.
Right. But here's the thing, even with a blueprint, there's still room for, like, improvisation. Life throws curveballs.
Absolutely. Things change, and so do we. It's like, think of a city, right? It's constantly evolving, new buildings, old ones getting repurposed. Our personalities, they adapt in a similar way, especially after big life events. Graduating, starting a new job, falling in love, even dealing with loss or tough times. These experiences, they can push us to grow, to discover parts of ourselves we didn't even know were there.
And that's where the whole nurture argument really clicks, doesn't it? We're not just stuck with whatever we were born with or what happened to us in the past. We can learn, we can change, we can actually become different people.
Huh.
In Unit 12, it even says environmental psychology shows that personality is constantly adapting. Though I got to admit, when they mentioned social conditioning, it kind of made me think of, ooh, like a creepy sci-fi movie or something.
Yeah, that term definitely has some unsettling connotations. But think about it this way. From the moment we're born, we're surrounded by all these social rules, expectations, all this unspoken stuff. We learn how to act in ways that are considered acceptable. That's how we develop social intelligence, how to read people, navigate those tricky social situations, and make connections.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing then. It's more about adapting to the social environment we're in.
Exactly. Have you ever noticed how you act differently depending on who you're with? Like you might be more reserved around new people, but totally yourself with close friends. That's social conditioning in action. We're constantly picking up on social cues and adjusting our behavior, often without even realizing it. And over time, those little adjustments, they can actually shape our personalities in big ways.
So we're all just actors on a stage, changing our performance based on the role we're playing and who's watching. But even the best actors, they bring something unique to a role, right? Their own personal style. So even with this social conditioning, there's still room for our individuality to come through.
Absolutely. Social conditioning, it gives us the framework, the guidelines, but it doesn't write the whole script. We bring our own experiences, our values, everything that makes us to every interaction. And it's that mix of the social and the personal that makes us so complex and interesting, wouldn't you say?
Totally. And this is what I find so fascinating. We're not just talking about like general social norms here.
Right.
This is about how our genes and our environment, they're constantly interacting, affecting everything. Our behavior, our biology, our personalities.
Exactly. And the research you found, it's full of concrete examples of this in action. Like, there's this study by Trebier and Carrion. They found that stress, something we usually think of as environmental, well, it can actually change our genes.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, and then those changes can actually affect our personalities, making us more or less resilient. It really shows how powerfully our experiences can shape who we are, even on a biological level.
Wow, that's pretty wild. So it's like our environment is literally leaving its mark on our DNA. But it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it? There's also that research from Faustova and Roldagina on dopamine, that neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and all that.
Right. And their findings, they add a whole other layer of complexity to this. They found a connection between dopamine levels and things like resilience, meaning that even our brain chemistry, which we often think is all about genetics, can be affected by what we go through.
So someone who might be genetically predisposed to lower dopamine, and maybe they struggle with motivation, feeling resilient.
Right, but then positive experiences, good relationships, even things like practicing mindfulness or gratitude, those can actually boost dopamine production. It's like rewiring the brain for greater well-being.
So it's not like we're stuck with whatever brain chemistry we're born with.
Not at all. We can influence it, shape our own neural pathways through the choices we make, the experiences we seek out.
So what I'm hearing is it's not about pretending our genes or our past don't matter. It's more about realizing we have more control than we might think.
Exactly. We're not just passive products of our genetics or our environment. We can make choices, develop habits, even create environments that help us become the people we want to be.
That's actually really empowering.
Mhm.
But it does make you wonder, if our environment is that influential, what happens when those environments are, well, kind of extreme?
That's a really important point, and it's often overlooked. We've been talking about those subtle ways our genes and environment interact. But there's another side to this, a darker side, that we can't ignore. And this is where that research from Ravi Shankar and Satya Salan comes in.
Oh, right. They were looking at the effects of childhood trauma, right?
Exactly. They were studying how early trauma can lead to something called personality pathology.
And that's different from just, like, having a quirky personality, right?
Right. Personality pathology, it's more about those deep-seated, inflexible patterns of thinking and behaving, the kind that cause real distress and make it hard to function in everyday life.
So this is about more serious mental health challenges that can actually stem from having a rough childhood.
Exactly. And while Ravi Shankar and Satya Salan's research doesn't give us all the answers, it really highlights how big of an impact early adversity can have on the developing brain and ultimately on how our lives turn out.
So for kids who experience chronic trauma abuse, neglect, witnessing violence.
Right. They often develop coping mechanisms that, while they make sense in the moment, can become unhealthy in adulthood. It can make it hard to form healthy relationships, deal with emotions, even just handle the everyday stuff.
It's a good reminder that even though we're capable of resilience, of growing from challenges, we're not invincible, especially during those early years. But before we go too far down that road, let's shift gears a bit. I want to bring in another perspective. This might seem a little contradictory to everything we've been talking about so far. It has to do with John B. Watson.
Ah, yes. John B. Watson, the father of behaviorism, known for making some pretty bold claims about the power of nurture.
Like that famous quote where he said he could take any infant and train them to be whatever he wanted. A doctor, a lawyer. He even said a beggar man and thief.
Right. Now, his methods would definitely be considered unethical these days, but his words, they really make you think. How much of who we become is shaped by our environment?
I mean, just reading that quote, it really makes you wonder, like, what if we could hit the reset button, What if we were suddenly dropped into a completely different life? Would we be different people?
It's a question that's been around forever, hasn't it? And while we can't exactly recreate Watson's experiment, thankfully there are real-life examples that suggest, yeah, our environment can really reshape us.
Right, like think about people who move to a new country, immerse themselves in a different culture, or even like when people join groups with really strong beliefs. Those experiences can totally change how they see the world, how they act, even their personalities.
Exactly. We're incredibly adaptable, always responding to our surroundings.
But if that's true, if our environment is that influential, does that mean we're kind of stuck? Like at the mercy of where we live, who we hang out with?
Not at all. And this is where I think Watson, even with his, let's say, questionable methods, he actually offers a bit of hope.
How so?
Because if we accept just how powerful our environment is, well, then we can become architects of our own little worlds, right?
Okay, I like that.
We can choose to be around people and in places that encourage the kind of person we want to be.
So instead of thinking, oh, this is just who I am because of my past, my genes, we can actually have a say in how we grow.
Exactly. We're not just shaped by our environment, we can shape it.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
It's about realizing we have more agency than we might realize.
This actually reminds me of that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Like, our social circles, they're kind of these hidden forces that shape our beliefs, our actions, even our goals.
It's true. We're social creatures. We crave connection. And those connections, they have a huge influence on us, whether we realize it or not. If you're always around negative people, always complaining, it's easy to get sucked into that, you know?
Yeah, sure.
But if you surround yourself with people who are striving, growing, supporting each other, well, that energy, it's contagious.
It really is.
It's like we're all part of this web constantly influencing each other. So, yeah, it's worth thinking about who you're spending your time with, what kind of environments, online and offline, you're exposing yourself to.
100%.
Yeah.
But, you know, this whole conversation makes me think it's not just about our external environment, right?
What do you mean?
Our internal environment, what's going on inside us, that matters too, right?
Ah, I see what you're getting at. Yeah. We can't forget about self-awareness.
Exactly.
We've talked a lot about our genes, our upbringing, our social circles, but there's a whole internal world that we need to explore as well.
So how do we do that?
Well, it's about getting to know yourself, your patterns, what triggers you, your strengths, even the not-so-great parts. The more we understand ourselves, the better choices we can make.
Choices that are actually in line with what we want, what we value.
Exactly.
This has been, wow, this deep dive has really given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
I mean, we've gone from nature versus nurture to how our environment shapes us to even the importance of self-awareness. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that personality, it's not set in stone. It's more like it's always evolving, right?
I love that. It really is about the journey, not just the destination. And the best part is we have more say in how that journey unfolds than we might realize.
It's kind of beautiful in a way, don't you think? We're not just stuck with whatever we inherited or what happened to us. We can actually choose who we become.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process of growth and discovery.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with that thought. Keep exploring who you are, keep asking questions, and remember, this journey of self-discovery, it's an adventure. Until next time.